Jessa Jennings hadn't meant to stop for the man in the rain. She was already late for her second job, and her gas tank was practically running on fumes, but something about the way he stood on the shoulder of the coastal highway, drenched and glaring at his useless phone, made her pull over. "Hey. You okay?" she called, leaning across the passenger seat to push open the door. The man turned, water dripping from his dark hair, his tailored jacket clinging to his broad shoulders. He looked like he belonged in a boardroom, not stranded off Highway 101. "My car died," he said, voice deep and clear despite the storm. "Phone's useless out here, no signal." "Well, you're in luck," Jessa said, brushing her damp bangs from her forehead. "I'm heading into town, hop in." He hesitated, then ducked into the car. "Thanks," he muttered, shutting the door. "I wasn't expecting roadside angels today," she laughed. "I'm no angel, but I do have a heater." He didn't smile, not really, but his eyes, gray, sharp, tired, softened just enough. "Name's Vaughn Rainer, Jessa," she said, flicking on the defrost. "So, Vaughn Rainer, what kind of car dies on you in the middle of a thunderstorm?" "A very expensive one," he muttered. She chuckled as she pulled back onto the road. "Figures. You look like someone who drives something with its own zip code." He glanced at her, a flicker of amusement in his eyes. "You make a habit of picking up strangers, only the ones getting soaked to death in $1,000 suits. You think this suit cost $1,000? I think I could pay rent for 3 months with whatever's on your wrist." She nodded toward his watch, classic and sleek. He looked down at it like he'd forgotten it was there. "I guess I'm a little overdressed for the occasion." "Yeah, well, I'm wearing a thrift store hoodie and I smell like French fries, so you'll survive." He looked at her again, really looked this time. She wasn't trying to impress him. Her hair was pulled into a messy ponytail, her jeans were faded at the knees, and her hoodie had a tiny ketchup stain on the sleeve. She had warm brown eyes and the kind of smile that made you forget how cold the rain was outside. The ride was only supposed to take 15 minutes. She dropped him at a boutique hotel downtown, somewhere she'd never be able to afford even a drink. He reached into his wallet without thinking. "No way," she said, holding up a hand. "This wasn't an Uber ride, just a quick rescue." He hesitated. "At least let me take you to dinner." She raised an eyebrow. "You want to repay a ride with a date?" "I want to repay kindness with dinner. You didn't have to stop." "You did." Jessa shook her head, smiling. "You're not used to people doing things just to be nice, huh?" He didn't answer, just stared at her like she was something he couldn't figure out. "Tell you what," she added, shifting into drive. "Maybe I'll run into you again when it's not pouring." She left him standing there under the awning, watching her drive off into the rain. 2 days later, Jessa was restocking shelves at the grocery store when she heard her name over the intercom. "Jessa Jennings, front desk, please." She wiped her hands on her apron and jogged to the front. A man stood at the customer service counter, holding a cup tray with 2 coffees and a small white box. Vaughn. He was dry this time, in a navy coat and jeans that still looked like they cost more than her car. "You tracked me down," she said, raising a brow. "You said maybe I'd run into you again. Thought I'd increase the odds." She blinked. "How did you even find me?" He held up a hand. "Not in a creepy way. I remembered your name, Jessa Jennings, and asked the hotel concierge if they could help me find the local businesses in town. I got lucky when someone recognized your name from the store." She stared at him. "That's weirdly persistent. I wanted to thank you, again. And maybe see if you'd still let me take you to dinner." She crossed her arms. "You don't give up, do you?" He smiled, a real one this time. "Not when something feels worth it." Jessa found herself sitting across from Vaughn that evening at a candlelit rooftop restaurant overlooking the ocean. The place was surreal glass walls, white tablecloths, soft jazz floating through the air. She'd borrowed a dress from her roommate, a simple black one, and she felt like a fraud the entire time walking in. "You okay?" Vaughn asked as they sat. "This place is." "Wow," she said, looking around. "You sure they didn't mistake me for someone else when I walked in?" "They knew exactly who you were," he said. "You're with me." Something in the way he said it made her heart skip. Over wine and seafood she could barely pronounce, they really talked. About her 2 jobs, her dreams of going back to school, her love for old books and quiet mornings. About his work, well, vaguely. He didn't give much away and she didn't push. "You're not exactly a guy who breaks down on the side of the road," she said at one point. What were you doing out there? He was quiet for a moment. Trying to clear my head. Sometimes you can have everything and still feel lost. She didn't ask what he had, but she felt the weight behind his words. By the time he walked her to her car, the air had turned soft and warm. I had a really good time, she said. So did I, he said, stepping closer. Can I see you again? She hesitated. Vaughn, I'm not someone who fits into your world. He tilted his head. And what world is that? The one with rooftop restaurants and watches that cost more than rent, he smiled. That's not my world, that's just money. You're the first real thing I've felt in months, her breath caught. He leaned in, not kissing her, just close enough for her to feel the heat of him. I'm not asking you to give me forever, he said softly. Just another chance. She nodded, heart pounding. Okay, Jessa didn't know that night was the beginning of it all. The quick car ride had just been a moment, but it changed everything. Because Vaughn Rainer, millionaire, guarded, powerful, and used to being alone, was already falling. Not for her looks, not for her clothes, but for the girl who stopped in the rain just to make sure he was okay. Jessa didn't expect him to keep calling. She figured the rooftop dinner had been a one-time indulgence that Vaughn Rainer, whoever he truly was beneath the expensive fabrics and practiced calm, would vanish back into the kind of life people like her only saw in commercials. But he didn't vanish. He showed up, not with flowers, not with grand declarations. He showed up at the community center where she volunteered on Saturday mornings, holding a crate of bottled water under one arm and a bag of fresh fruit in the other. How did you even know I'd be here? She asked, glancing around the bustling room filled with kids lining up for snacks and art supplies. I asked around, he said, setting the crate down. Apparently, you've been helping here every weekend for over a year. I figured you'd be hard to miss. She narrowed her eyes. You're not good at taking hints, are you? You didn't give one. You don't think showing up here is a bit over the top? I think helping kids paint birdhouses isn't exactly scandalous, he said, lifting an eyebrow. Unless there's a dark side to glitter glue I don't know about. Jessa tried not to laugh, but failed. Fine, you can stay, but don't expect a gold star. I'm not here for gold stars, he said, rolling up his sleeves. By the end of the morning, he had glitter in his hair, a red paint smear across the cuff of his button-down, and a group of 5-year-olds chanting his name like he was a celebrity. She watched him kneel beside a girl struggling to tie her apron, his voice low and patient. He didn't pretend to know what he was doing. He just did what was needed later as they wiped tables and stacked chairs. Jessa leaned against the wall, arms crossed. You're full of surprises, she said. You haven't seen anything yet, Vaughn replied, tossing a wet rag into the bin. I'm apparently better at glitter crafts than I am at emails. Who knew? You're not what I thought you were, he looked over at her. And what did you think I was? Someone who wouldn't last 10 minutes in this place without checking his watch. I didn't wear one today. She glanced at his bare wrist. Point made. He stepped closer. I like being around you, Jessa. You don't ask me for anything. You don't care about what I own. You just see people, she swallowed. I see you, Vaughn, but I don't know you. Then get to know me, she hesitated. The air between them shifted warmer, heavier. She pushed off the wall. There's a diner 5 blocks from here. I was going to grab a sandwich. You're welcome to join. He followed her without question. Inside the worn booth beneath buzzing fluorescent lights, Vaughn didn't seem out of place the way she expected. He asked the waitress about her day. He ordered a grilled cheese and tomato soup, no substitutions, no pretenses. I used to come to places like this with my mother, he said, stirring his soup, before everything changed. What changed? He was quiet for a moment. She married into money, Jessa blinked. Not the answer I was expecting. My stepfather is driven. He built something massive out of nothing and expected everyone around him to do the same, including me. So you followed in his footsteps. I inherited them, whether I wanted to or not. She studied his face. Do you like what you do? I like parts of it. The control, the strategy. But lately, I feel like I'm running someone else's race. That's why you were out on the highway, he nodded. You don't talk like someone who wants to be saved, she said. I don't, he replied. I just want something real. She tapped her spoon against her glass. You know this doesn't make sense, right? You and me. It doesn't have to make sense to anyone but us. She sat back, studying him. You're not even trying to impress me. I already am impressed by you, that's enough. That night he walked her home. Not to a fancy loft or a waterfront condo, but a narrow walk up above a laundromat. He didn't flinch at the chipped paint or the flickering hall light. He just stood at her door, hands in his coat pockets. I'll walk you to your car, she offered, half teasing. He shook his head. I'll call a car. Of course you will, he grinned. I'll see you soon, she nodded. You will. Jessa didn't tell anyone at work about him. It wasn't just that no one would believe her, though they wouldn't. It was that she didn't know how to explain him. Vaughn Rainer wasn't a boyfriend. He wasn't a client. He wasn't a fantasy either, though he should have been. He started showing up on quiet weekdays with coffee and questions, real ones, about her favorite book, the first song she ever loved, whether she'd ever left the country. She noticed how carefully he listened, how he never interrupted, how he remembered the smallest details. Like the name of her high school science teacher, or the way she always twisted her ring when she was thinking. One afternoon, he met her outside the grocery store just as she was finishing her shift. It had rained earlier and the pavement still glistened. I want to show you something, he said, holding out a hand. She hesitated. Where? You'll see. His car wasn't the kind of vehicle she'd ever been in, sleek, black, and so quiet she barely heard the engine. He drove out of town past the cliffs until the road narrowed and the trees thickened. Eventually, he turned onto a private drive that led to a gated estate. You live here? She asked, eyes wide as the wrought iron gates opened without a key. For now, he said. Come on. The house was glass and stone, modern but warm, with views that stretched for miles. Inside, everything gleamed: wood floors, soft lighting, floor-to-ceiling windows that let in the ocean breeze. This doesn't feel like a place you bring just anyone, she said, stepping into the living room. I don't. She turned to him. Then why me? He walked to the window. Because you're the only person who's ever made me feel like this isn't a cage. Jessa looked around. It's a beautiful cage. I'm not complaining, he said. But it's easy to get lost in all of this, and you cut right through it. She walked over slowly. What do you want from me, Vaughn? He turned, looking at her in a way that made her heart race. Everything. She didn't move. That's a lot to ask, I know, he said, but I've never been more certain of anything. She stared at him for a long moment. Then she reached up and brushed a loose curl from her forehead. You're going to break my heart, aren't you? No, he said, voice steady. I'm going to prove it's stronger than you think. And for the first time, she believed him. Don't look down, Vaughn said, offering his hand. Jessa stood at the edge of the helipad, the city lights sparkling below like spilled diamonds. The night breeze lifted her hair as she stared at the sleek black helicopter waiting beside them, its blades still. You're kidding, she said, glancing from the aircraft to Vaughn's outstretched hand. We're not actually getting in that. We are, he said calmly. There's something I want to show you. I have a shift tomorrow, she muttered, even as she placed her hand in his. And also, I've never been in one of these, like ever. You said once that you'd never seen the city from above. I remembered. You really don't know how to do ordinary, do you? I don't want ordinary. Not with you. The helicopter lifted into the air moments later, city blocks shrinking beneath them as the skyline unfolded like a movie. Jessa gripped the edge of her seat, knuckles white, then slowly released when she saw Vaughn watching her. I'm not scared, she said. I didn't say you were. I just okay, maybe a little. His voice was quiet over the headset. You don't have to pretend with me. She turned her head to look at him. I don't, weirdly. They flew over the bay, the water below reflecting the moon in fragments. The pilot banked slightly, revealing a cluster of floating lights ahead. What is that? She asked, leaning forward. Wait and see. They descended onto a private dock extending from an island barely visible in the dark. A long stone path wound its way through firefly-lit trees toward a villa glowing with warm light. White paper lanterns hung in the branches overhead, swaying gently. Jessa stopped walking. This isn't a date, she said. This is a fairy tale. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he led her to a table set for two beneath an open pergola draped in ivy and candles. The scent of salt and jasmine filled the air. A string quartet played somewhere in the distance, soft, unobtrusive, and impossibly romantic. I brought you here because I wanted you to see my favorite view, he said, pulling out her chair. It's not the city, it's not the house, it's not even the ocean. She narrowed her eyes slightly. What is it then? He sat across from her, his gaze steady. You. The food arrived in elegant courses, but Jessa barely tasted any of it. Her mind was spinning. The place, the gesture, the way he looked at her like she was the only woman in the world, it was overwhelming, but not suffocating. What do you want from me, Vaughn? She asked finally, her voice barely above the sound of the waves. I don't want anything, he said. I just want to know you, all of you, the parts you don't show anyone else. She shook her head slowly. That's dangerous. So is falling. You've done that before. He didn't blink. Not like this. She lowered her eyes, heart thudding. You know I'm not your type. He leaned forward. I don't have a type, I have a truth, and you're it. Silence stretched between them. I don't know what to do with this, she admitted. This, life, I mean, look at where we are, this isn't real. It's real because you're here, he said, not in spite of it. She pushed her plate aside, folding her arms. You could have anyone, literally anyone. And you're chasing me around grocery stores and flying me to candlelit islands. Why? Because when I'm with you, I'm not performing, he said. I'm not negotiating or pretending or calculating, I'm just me. And I don't know who else I can be that with. She stared at him across the flickering candlelight, and for the first time she saw the exhaustion in his eyes, the vulnerability he masked so well. He wasn't just rich, he was lonely, and she understood that better than he could ever guess. He drove her home in silence, the night air cool through the open windows of a vintage convertible, the stars wheeling overhead. When they reached her building, she hesitated before unbuckling. I don't want to be your escape, she said. You're not. I don't want to be a phase either. Something you remember fondly while sipping champagne in a penthouse 5 years from now. He turned off the engine. You think I'm playing a game, he said. I think you're used to getting what you want, and I'm not. Easy to want. He looked directly at her. You're impossible not to want. She opened the door and stepped out, her heels clicking on the concrete. She didn't invite him up. She didn't look back until she reached the stairs. You coming? She asked, her voice steady. He followed without a word. Inside her apartment, she kicked off her shoes and curled her feet beneath her on the couch. Vaughn sat on the floor across from her, jacket discarded, shirt sleeves rolled to his elbows. She studied him. Without the lights, the suits, the backdrop of wealth, he looked younger, less guarded. What did you want to be? She asked. Before all this, she nodded. He leaned back against the couch, gazing at the ceiling. A pilot, she blinked. Seriously, my mom used to take me to the airfield on weekends. I loved watching the planes take off. It felt like freedom. And now I have all the freedom in the world, and I barely use it. She reached down and tugged one of his hands into hers. His fingers were cool, steady. I wanted to be a writer, she said. But then life happened. Maybe it's not too late, for you or for me, for both of us. Neither of them spoke for a while. The only sound was the hum of the fridge and the distant thump of traffic below. Finally, he looked up at her. If I asked you to come with me tomorrow on a trip, just us, would you? Where? Somewhere no one knows either of us. She hesitated. Then slowly she nodded. Yes. He stood and kissed her forehead, lingering there for a breath before pulling away. I'll pick you up at 8. The next morning, a black SUV waited at the curb as promised. Jessa wore her most comfortable jeans and a soft sweater, her duffel slung over one shoulder. Vaughn opened the door for her. No helicopter this time. No. Something different. They drove an hour north, past vineyards and winding roads, until they reached a secluded villa tucked into the hills. Stone terraces spilled into gardens bursting with lavender and wild roses. A small lake glittered in the distance. She stepped out, stunned. What is this place? My mother's. She passed it down to me when she retired. You brought me here, he shrugged. It's where I go when I need to remember who I am. They spent the day wandering the grounds, talking about nothing and everything. Vaughn showed her the spot where he learned to fish, the bench where he used to read, the olive trees he helped plant when he was 16. That night, they sat by the fireplace, wrapped in a blanket, watching the flames. I don't know what happens next, she whispered. I don't either, he said. But I know I want to find out. With you. She leaned into him, heart strangely calm. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel like she was waiting for the other shoe to drop. She felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be. Jessa stood at the edge of the vineyard, fingers brushing the tops of the grapevines as the sunlight filtered through the leaves. The late morning air carried the scent of rosemary and something sweet she couldn't place. In the distance, Vaughn was barefoot on the grass, tossing breadcrumbs to a pair of ducks near the pond's edge, his rolled sleeves damp from where he dipped his hand in the water. She watched him for a moment before crossing the garden path. "You're not very good at being a millionaire," she said, stopping beside him. He glanced up from the ducks. "Is that a complaint, an observation? You're supposed to be on the phone yelling at someone in a glass office tower, not hand-feeding wildlife." "I've done enough yelling for one lifetime. I'm trying something new." She crouched beside him, eyeing the ducks. "What's next?" "Beekeeping. There's a hive on the other side of the orchard." She looked at him, then laughed softly. "Of course there is." They walked back toward the villa in comfortable silence, passing low stone walls and lemon trees heavy with fruit. The weekend had stretched longer than either of them expected, each hour folding into the next with quiet ease. But as the sun climbed higher, Jessa's chest tightened with the knowledge that time was no longer on their side. Inside, the house was cool and quiet. Vaughn poured 2 glasses of iced tea and led her to the study, where floor-to-ceiling shelves held worn hardcovers and faded maps. A grand piano sat untouched in the corner. "You play?" she asked, tilting her head toward the piano. "I used to." He handed her a glass. "Before the deals. Before the boardrooms, before I became a name instead of a person." She ran a hand along the back of a velvet armchair. "You let them take too much of you." He leaned against the desk. "I let myself get addicted to it, the speed, the control, but it always left me with this hollow ache." She sipped her tea, watching him. "And now I want something that doesn't vanish the second I look away." Her pulse picked up. "Is that why you brought me here?" He set his glass down carefully. "I brought you here because you make me feel like I still have a shot at being whole. You remind me of who I was before success turned into survival." She stepped closer. "And who was that? A boy who believed love could fix things." She touched her hand to his chest. "It doesn't fix everything, but it can make the broken pieces hurt less." His eyes darkened. "Then I'm already halfway healed." They stood there, the silence between them charged with something deeper than attraction. But before she could speak again, the chime of a phone echoed from the next room. Vaughn's jaw tightened. "I turned everything off this weekend. That line should be dead." Jessa followed him into the hallway, where an antique phone sat on a narrow table. He picked it up, listened, then turned away, his voice low. She couldn't hear the words, but she saw the shift in his shoulders, the stiffening of his spine. When he hung up, he didn't speak right away. "What happened?" she asked. "That was my firm's lead counsel. There's a leak. Someone in my inner circle sold private information about a merger I've been fighting to keep quiet." Her brow furrowed. "What does that mean for you?" "It means the deal's compromised. And depending on how deep the leak goes, I could be facing an investigation." She hesitated. "Is this the kind of thing that could ruin you?" He looked at her. "If I handle it wrong, yes." A silence settled between them. He ran a hand through his hair. "I thought I could step away for a few days, breathe, be with you. But the second I let go, someone used it against me. You think this happened because of me?" "No, but I think I let my guard down." She crossed her arms. "You think that's a mistake?" He didn't answer. "I'm not asking you to stop being who you are," she said. "But I won't be the reason you start doubting yourself again." "That's not what I meant." "Maybe not, but it's what I heard." She left the room before he could answer. Outside, the wind had picked up. The vines swayed, casting long, restless shadows across the grass. Jessa sat on the low stone wall, her hands gripping the edge, trying to anchor herself. It wasn't the wealth, the helicopters, or the candlelit dinners that scared her. It was the collision of 2 worlds that had no business touching. She could weather the looks, the whispers, even the doubt. But she couldn't be someone else's liability. Vaughn found her an hour later, his expression unreadable. "I fired my CFO," she turned. "What?" He was the leak. "I suspected him for weeks, but I didn't want to believe it. He was my father's guy, loyal, or so I thought." She studied his face. "And what now?" "Damage control, meetings, lawyers, media management." She nodded slowly. "Then I should go." He stepped forward. "No, you shouldn't. I'm not going to be the girl everyone blames for distracting you. You think this is about distraction." Jessa, being with you didn't make me weaker. It made me remember what strength actually feels like. She searched his eyes. Then why did you pull away earlier? Because I was afraid. Not of the leak, not of the fallout, of losing this, you, she swallowed hard. You've built a life that keeps people out, but I'm already in. And if you don't want me to leave, you need to stop treating me like a variable you can't control. He stepped even closer. I don't want control, I want a future. With me? Yes, she shook her head slightly. You don't even know what that looks like. I know what it doesn't look like. It doesn't look like me waking up without you, her breath hitched. You're serious. I spent years thinking love was a weakness, but you've proven me wrong every single day since that night in the rain. And now I'm standing here, terrified, because for the first time in my life, I actually care more about someone else than I do about winning. She blinked rapidly. Say that again. I love you, Jessa. A small sound escaped her throat, somewhere between a laugh and a sob. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a velvet box. Her heart stopped. Don't freak out, he said quickly. It's not a proposal. She stared at him. Not yet, he added, but I want you to have this. He opened the box. Inside was a simple gold ring, delicately engraved with a single word on the inside band, real. I had it made the week after our first dinner, he said. I didn't know what it would mean yet. I just knew I didn't want to forget how that night made me feel. She reached for the ring, fingers trembling. You're insane. I know. She slid it onto her finger. It fit perfectly, he exhaled. You're not alone in this anymore. Whatever comes, whatever happens with the company, the press, the world, I want you beside me. Not behind me, beside me. She stepped into his arms, pressing her cheek to his chest as he wrapped her in warmth and certainty. I love you too, she whispered. He lifted her chin. Say it again. I love you. They kissed as the wind rushed through the vines, as if the earth itself was holding its breath. Weeks passed. The story broke briefly. But Vaughn managed the press with precision, cutting ties where needed and rebuilding what mattered. Jessa stayed by his side, not as a shadow, not as a secret, but as an equal. They moved into a townhouse in the city's old quarter, one with creaky floorboards and ivy climbing the windows, not because it was grand, but because it felt like them. And one spring morning, as sunlight streamed across the breakfast table and he handed her a mug of coffee with a kiss, Vaughn Rainer got down on one knee with no crowd, no cameras, no spectacle, just her. Marry me, Jessa, not because you saved me, but because you saw me. She didn't hesitate. Yes. And for the first time in his life, Vaughn didn't just fall, he soared. The morning of the engagement party arrived in a burst of sunshine and nerves. Jessa stood in front of the mirror in Vaughn's townhouse, their townhouse now trying to steady her hands as she fastened the intricate pearl clasp at her nape. The slate blue gown fell in soft waves around her legs, the fabric whispering against the polished wood floors as she moved. She barely recognized the woman in the mirror, confident, luminous, and somehow fully herself. Behind her, Vaughn leaned in the doorway, watching her with a quiet intensity that made her breath catch. You're staring, she said without turning. I'm trying to memorize you like this, he said. Before the chaos starts, she turned, meeting his eyes in the reflection. You're not nervous. I've negotiated international acquisitions under threat of federal investigation. Tonight is nothing. She turned to face him. Except this time, it's personal. He walked to her, adjusting the tiny diamond pin in her hair. Exactly. That's why it's perfect. The party was held at the Winterbourne estate, an ivy-wrapped, French-inspired manor tucked into the rolling hills outside the city. Vaughn had chosen it not for its grandeur, but because his mother had once brought him there as a child, whispering that it was the most magical place she'd ever seen. The estate had been transformed into a twilight dream. Thousands of soft white lights shimmered through the gardens, and a quartet played beneath a canopy of wisteria. Guests arrived in sleek black cars, stepping out in gowns and tailored suits, their voices a low hum as they mingled under the lantern glow. Jessa held Vaughn's hand as they descended the stone steps into the crowd, her heart thundering beneath her ribs. There they are, someone whispered. She felt eyes on her, curious, appraising, skeptical, and for the first time she didn't shrink from it. Vaughn's fingers tightened around hers. You're not alone, he said, reading her tension. Not for a single second. They were quickly surrounded by a tide of congratulations. Vaughn's longtime friend, a media executive with a knowing smile, clapped him on the back. "Didn't think I'd live to see the day," he said. "You've been impossible to crack since grad school." Apparently, I was waiting for the right person. Jessa turned at the sound of a woman's voice behind her. "You must be Jessa." A tall woman in her 60s stepped forward, her silver hair styled in soft waves, eyes sharp but kind. "I'm Vaughn Rainer," she said, extending her hand. "Vaughn's mother." Jessa's breath caught. "It's an honor to meet you." Marissa's hand was warm and firm. "I've heard a great deal about you, but I wanted to see for myself." Jessa blinked. "See what? If you were the woman who finally gave my son a reason to breathe differently." Vaughn touched his mother's shoulder. "She's the reason I stopped running." "I know," Marissa said softly. Then she turned to Jessa. "He's not an easy man, but he's a good one. And if he's chosen you, I imagine you're extraordinary." "I'm just trying to keep up," Jessa said, her voice quiet. Marissa tilted her head. "No, you're not keeping up. You're keeping him grounded." Later, as the evening deepened and laughter spilled like champagne through the garden, Vaughn led Jessa through a side path lined with flickering lanterns. "Where are we going?" she asked. "I couldn't wait," he said. "I've been carrying this in my pocket for a week." He stopped beneath a canopy of trees strung with lights, the world hushed and golden around them. Then he dropped to one knee. Jessa froze, every breath in her body stilled. "Jessa Jennings," he said, voice low but steady. "You saved me before I even knew I needed saving. You gave me nights filled with silence that felt like music, mornings filled with meaning, and a future I didn't think I deserved. You made me want to be better. And I don't want a single day to pass without you by my side." He opened a velvet box. Inside was a ring unlike anything she'd ever imagined, rose gold, delicate, with a sapphire nestled in a halo of diamonds. "Marry me." She sank to her knees, her hands trembling as she cradled his face. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I'll marry you." He kissed her, laughter caught between them, and the world narrowed to just the two of them beneath the stars. They married 6 months later in a garden that bloomed just for them. The ceremony was intimate, 60 guests, a string trio, and vows that made even the most stoic attendees blink back tears. Jessa wore a gown of silk that shimmered like moonlight, her hair pinned with wildflowers. Vaughn waited for her at the altar, beneath a canopy of olive branches, his eyes never leaving hers. "I vow," he said, his voice thick, "to never forget what it means to fight for something real." "I vow," she replied, "to remind you every day what love can feel like." They kissed as the breeze lifted her veil and the world erupted in applause. That night, they danced beneath the stars on the same terrace where he had first told her he loved her. But this time, there was no hesitation, no fear, only joy. In the months that followed, Vaughn stepped down as CEO, handing the reins to a trusted partner. He didn't want the empire anymore, he wanted a life. He started a mentorship foundation for young entrepreneurs from underprivileged backgrounds, naming it after his mother. Jessa returned to school part-time to finish her degree in literature, teaching creative writing workshops at the same community center where they'd painted birdhouses. They traveled quiet corners of the world, not resorts. They made pasta in Italy with a grandmother who didn't speak English, camped in the redwoods, and watched the northern lights from a cabin with no electricity. They built a home in a valley framed by hills and silence, where the mornings were slow, and the evenings filled with the scent of herbs and wood smoke. And one rainy spring afternoon, as Vaughn stood barefoot in the kitchen kneading bread, Jessa came up behind him and placed his hand over her stomach. He froze. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. She nodded. He turned and pulled her into his arms, burying his face in her neck. "I didn't think anything could come close to loving you," he breathed. "But I think this might." Years later, on a summer evening just like the one when they met, Vaughn stood at the edge of their porch cradling a sleepy toddler against his chest while Jessa read a book aloud from the swing. Their daughter's tiny fingers curled into his shirt, her breath warm, and even Jessa looked up. "You remember that night?" she asked. "The rain, the ride," he nodded. "I remember everything," she smiled. "I almost didn't stop." He kissed their daughter's curls. "I would have found you anyway." And as the sun dipped below the hills and their world quieted around them, Vaughn Rainer, once a man lost in a fortress of glass and power, stood surrounded by everything he never knew he needed: love, laughter, and the woman who had made it all real.